The shocking truth about what pirates did to their female captives the morning began like many others on the open sea. The merchant ship moved steadily across the water, its wooden body creaking softly as it cut through the waves. The sky was clear, and the wind was calm enough to make the journey feel almost peaceful. On board were traders, sailors, and a small number of women traveling for different reasons. Some were wives following their husbands to new ports. Some were daughters returning home. Others worked as helpers, cooks, or caretakers, earning their passage through honest labor. None of them expected the day to change their lives forever. The women stayed mostly together near the center of the ship, where they felt safest. They talked quietly, shared food, and watched the endless water stretch in every direction. Even though sea travel was always risky, they believed this journey would be like the others, long, tiring, but manageable. Pirates were stories people told at docks and taverns, frightening tales meant to entertain or warn. Few believed they would truly encounter them. That belief shattered when a cry rang out from the lookout above. A dark shape appeared on the horizon, moving faster than expected. At first, some thought it was just another trading ship, but as it drew closer, the signs became clear. The strange flag, the sharp turns, the speed that didn't match the wind. Fear spread quickly across the deck. Sailors rushed to their posts, shouting orders while passengers stood frozen, unsure what to do. The women felt their hearts pound as the ship's mood changed instantly. Calm voices turned sharp. Hands shook. Someone whispered the word everyone feared but hoped never to hear. Pirates? The merchant ship was not built for fighting. It carried goods, not weapons. As the pirate vessel closed in, panic took over. Some men tried to prepare a weak defense, but deep down they knew it was hopeless. The pirates surrounded the ship, their presence overwhelming. When they boarded, everything happened quickly. Loud voices, rough movements, and confusion filled the air. The women were pulled away from the center of the ship and ordered to stay together. They clutched each other's hands, trying to remain calm. They were not harmed at that moment, but fear was everywhere. The pirates did not see them as people with names, families, or stories. To them, the women were simply part of what had been taken. The captives were counted, watched, and moved with little explanation. The women noticed how the pirates spoke about them, not cruel words but cold ones, practical, as if they were objects that needed to be sorted and decided upon later. That made the fear worse. Not knowing what would happen next was more terrifying than any shouted threat. As the pirate ship pulled away, the women looked back at the merchant vessel that had once felt like safety. Now it was just a fading shape on the water. Some of the men they traveled with were left behind. Others were taken elsewhere. Families were split apart without time for goodbyes. Tears fell quietly because crying loudly felt dangerous. Below deck on the pirate ship, the women were kept in a dim space where the smell of salt and wood filled the air. There was barely enough room to sit comfortably. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretching painfully long. No one spoke much at first. Each woman was lost in her own thoughts, remembering home, wondering if anyone would ever know what happened to them. One woman, older than the rest, finally broke the silence. She spoke softly, reminding them to stay calm, to watch carefully, and to remember everything. Her voice was steady, and it gave the others a small sense of strength. They realized that fear alone would not help them survive. They needed awareness, patience, and hope, even if that hope was small. Above them, the pirates celebrated their victory. Laughter and footsteps echoed through the ship, but none of that joy reached the space where the captives sat. For the women, the sounds were a reminder of how powerless they were in that moment. They did not know where the ship was going or what would be asked of them. Their lives had been taken off their original path without warning. As hours passed, the women were brought up on deck one by one. The pirates looked them over in silence, not with interest but with calculation. They discussed where the ship would dock, what supplies were needed, and what could be gained from the captives. The women stood still, refusing to show fear even though it burned inside them. The sea stretched endlessly around them, offering no escape. Birds flew freely above, a painful contrast to their own situation. The sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the deck. With each passing moment, reality settled in deeper. This was not a nightmare they could wake up from. This was real. Night came, and with it a heavy silence. The women were returned below deck, given a small amount of food and water. It wasn't kindness, it was necessity. They understood that survival depended on staying healthy enough to be useful. That realization hurt almost as much as the capture itself. As the ship rocked gently on the waves, sleep came only in short, restless moments. Dreams were filled with familiar faces and places now far away. Some women whispered prayers. Others stared into the darkness, promising themselves they would endure whatever came next. By the time the sun rose again, they were no longer travelers. They were captives, caught in a world ruled by fear and uncertainty. Their old lives felt distant, like memories from another lifetime. What lay ahead was unknown, but one truth had already become clear. The sea had taken more than their freedom. It had taken their sense of safety, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed slowly revealed a truth the women had never imagined. Pirate life was nothing like the bold stories told in ports. There was no freedom, no fairness, and no honor. Everything worked on control, fear, and strict order. Each person on the ship knew their place, and stepping outside it brought trouble. The women quickly understood that survival depended on learning these unwritten rules. The pirate ship followed a harsh routine. Before sunrise, the crew was already awake, moving with purpose. Orders were short and loud. No one argued. The women were kept separate, watched carefully, and rarely spoken to directly. When they were spoken to, the tone was cold and businesslike. They were not shouted at, but they were never treated as equals. They were seen as something to manage. The captain was a distant figure. He rarely looked at the captives, but when he did, his eyes showed no emotion. He did not act in anger or kindness. Every decision he made was based on benefit. The women noticed that the crew feared him deeply. Even the loudest men fell silent when he appeared. That fear explained everything. This ship ran on power, not chaos. Some women were asked to help with basic tasks: cleaning small areas, preparing simple meals, or carrying supplies. These tasks were not offered as kindness. They were tests. The pirates watched closely to see who followed instructions, who stayed calm, and who caused trouble. The women realized that refusing was not an option. Cooperation became a form of protection. As time passed, they began to see that not all pirates were the same. Some crew members avoided looking at the captives at all. Others spoke only when necessary. A few showed signs of quiet regret, though they never said it aloud. But there were also those who enjoyed the control they had. They spoke with pride about their power, laughing among themselves. The women learned quickly who to avoid and who might be safer to be near. Information became valuable. The women listened carefully to every conversation around them. They learned the names of islands, ports, and rival crews. They learned which days were dangerous and which were calmer. Knowledge gave them a small sense of control in a situation where they had very little. One woman, younger and sharp-minded, noticed patterns. She observed when the crew was tired, when tempers were short, and when the captain was in a better mood. She quietly shared this information with the others. Over time, the women began to act as one unit, supporting each other without drawing attention. They spoke in whispers, using looks and small gestures instead of words. Food was limited, but the women learned how to make the most of it. They shared evenly, ensuring no one grew weak too quickly. Water was precious, and they took turns drinking carefully. These small acts of care helped them stay strong, both in body and spirit. In a place built on taking, sharing became their quiet resistance. The nights were the hardest. Darkness brought silence, and silence allowed thoughts to grow heavy. Memories of home returned with painful clarity. Faces of loved ones, unfinished dreams, and simple moments they once took for granted haunted them. Some cried softly. Others stayed awake, afraid that sleep would make them careless. Each night felt longer than the last. As the ship reached different hiding places along the coast, the women saw more of the pirate world. These were not grand settlements, but rough camps and hidden bays. Supplies were traded quickly and quietly. The pirates trusted no one outside their own crew. Every interaction was filled with suspicion. The women noticed how even the pirates lived in constant fear of betrayal. Sometimes other captives appeared briefly, men taken from different ships, forced to work for a short time before being left behind or traded away. These men looked broken and exhausted. Seeing them reminded the women that they were not alone in their suffering, even if they were isolated from the world. The pirates kept no records of the women. There were no names written down, no acknowledgement of their presence. This erasure made the women feel as though they had vanished from history itself. If no one knew they were here, how could anyone come looking for them? Yet even in this dark reality, small moments of humanity appeared. Once when a storm hit unexpectedly, the ship rocked violently. Fear spread among everyone, pirates included. In that moment, the women saw that even those who held power were not free from fear. The sea did not respect rank. When the storm passed, the shared experience left a quiet change in the air. The crew became less loud, more cautious. One older pirate quietly left an extra piece of bread near the women's space one evening. He said nothing and did not look back. The gesture was small, but it meant more than food. It was proof that not every heart on the ship was completely closed. The women did not trust him, but they remembered the act. As weeks passed, the women learned to measure time differently. Days blended together. What mattered was not the calendar, but survival. Each sunrise meant they had made it through another night. Each task completed without trouble was a small victory. They also learned that the pirates' strength was built on fear, but fear was fragile. The crew argued often among themselves. Disagreements over shares, routes, and decisions were common. The women listened closely. They understood that unity was rare even among those who claimed to live freely. This knowledge gave them a quiet sense of power. Not enough to escape, but enough to understand the world they were trapped in. They were no longer blind to it. They saw it clearly, and that clarity gave them strength. By the end of this phase of captivity, the women were changed. They were no longer just frightened travelers. They had become careful observers, learning how to survive in a place that offered no mercy. They did not know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain. Understanding the truth of pirate life, its cruelty, its fear, and its weakness, was the first step toward staying alive. As time passed, fear slowly changed its shape. It did not disappear, but it became quieter, more controlled. The women realized that panic only made things worse. What helped them most was awareness. They began to notice small details, the way footsteps sounded on the deck, the tone of voices, the meaning behind silence. These details helped them prepare for what might come next. One important lesson became clear early on. Being useful could mean staying alive. The pirates valued efficiency. Anyone who caused trouble was seen as a problem. Anyone who helped keep the ship running smoothly was tolerated. The women did not like this truth, but they understood it. Helping with simple tasks was not surrender, it was strategy. They worked carefully, never too fast, never too slow. They avoided drawing attention while making sure their efforts were noticed just enough. Cleaning, organizing, preparing simple food, these tasks gave them reasons to be present without being questioned. Over time, the pirates stopped watching them as closely. This small change gave the women a bit more breathing space. They also learned the power of silence. Speaking too much brought risk. Complaining brought punishment. Silence, however, allowed them to listen, and listening gave them knowledge. They learned which crew members argued often, which ones avoided conflict, and which ones followed orders without thinking. These patterns mattered. One woman noticed that the crew often split into small groups, each loyal to different leaders. The captain ruled overall, but power underneath was divided. Rivalries existed, even if they were hidden. The women understood that this division could protect them. When one group was nearby, another would keep its distance. Knowing where to stand and when to move became a quiet skill. Trust among the women grew stronger each day. They supported one another without speaking openly. If one woman looked tired, another would step in to help her. If one felt overwhelmed, the others would surround her, offering comfort through presence alone. This unity gave them strength. Alone, they were vulnerable. Together, they were steadier. One evening, a young woman dropped a container by accident. The sound echoed loudly. Fear rushed through her body. She expected anger. Instead, another woman quickly took responsibility, calmly explaining that the deck had shifted suddenly. The pirates accepted it and moved on. That moment taught them something powerful. Protecting one another mattered more than protecting themselves. The women also learned to control their expressions. Showing fear could invite attention. Showing anger could invite trouble. They practiced keeping their faces calm, their movements steady. Inside, their emotions were strong, but outside, they appeared quiet and focused. This emotional control became one of their greatest tools. Some women used their intelligence in different ways. One with a good memory remembered routes and landmarks. Another listened carefully to conversations about trade and hiding places. Another noticed changes in weather and how the crew reacted. Each skill added to their shared understanding of the situation. Hope became something they handled carefully. Too much hope could lead to disappointment. Too little could lead to despair. They balanced it quietly, holding onto small possibilities without letting them control their actions. Hope was not about escape alone. It was about surviving one more day with dignity. There were moments when their strength surprised even themselves. During a difficult day when supplies ran low, tension filled the ship. Voices grew sharp. The women stayed calm, moving slowly, avoiding eye contact, making themselves invisible. Their calm presence helped prevent further conflict. They realized that their behavior could influence the mood around them. The sea itself became a strange teacher. It was powerful, unpredictable, and indifferent. Storms reminded everyone how fragile life was. During rough weather, the women worked alongside the crew, holding ropes, steadying items, doing whatever was asked. In those moments, fear was shared by all. The sea did not care who held power. After one storm, the atmosphere changed again. The crew seemed more thoughtful, less loud. The women noticed fewer harsh words, more caution. It was not kindness, but it was a shift. They learned that shared danger could briefly break down barriers. Some days were harder than others. There were times when exhaustion took over, when memories of home felt too painful. On those days, the women leaned on routines. Simple actions, cleaning, folding, preparing, gave structure to time. Routine kept their minds from drifting too far into sadness. At night, they whispered quietly when it was safe. They shared stories of home, of people they missed, of ordinary moments they wished they could return to. These stories were not just memories. They were reminders of who they were before captivity. Remembering their identities helped them resist becoming just numbers or shadows. One woman spoke often about survival as a form of resistance. "If we endure," she said softly, "then they do not erase us." Her words stayed with the others. Survival was not weakness. It was strength in a difficult form. The women also learned when not to resist. There were moments when pushing back would only bring harm. Choosing silence over action was sometimes the bravest decision. This understanding did not come easily, but it kept them safe. Over time, the pirates began to see the women as part of the ship's rhythm. Not equals, but not constant threats either. This uneasy balance allowed the women to move more freely within limits. They memorized paths, doors, and spaces. They learned where light fell at certain hours and where shadows gathered. One day, the ship stopped near a hidden shore. Supplies were exchanged quickly. The women watched carefully, noting faces and movements. They understood that each stop meant change. Change could be dangerous, but it could also bring opportunity. They stayed alert, ready to adapt. Despite everything, the women never lost sight of each other. They checked in silently, counted heads, made sure no one was left behind. Their unity was their shield. In a world built on taking, they chose to protect. By this stage of their journey, the women were no longer only reacting to events. They were thinking ahead. They were planning in small, careful ways. Not bold plans, but quiet ones. Plans based on patience, observation, and trust. They did not know how long this life would last. They did not know how it would end. But they knew they were stronger than they had been at the beginning. They had adapted without losing themselves. They had resisted without open conflict. They had survived without becoming invisible. In a place designed to break people down, they held on to something powerful: their awareness, their unity, and their will to endure. And that quiet strength, built day by day, became the foundation that would carry them through whatever came next. Time moved forward, but the weight of the past never left the women. Even as they learned how to survive day by day, the cost of captivity slowly showed itself. It was not always visible. Sometimes it appeared as tired eyes, sometimes as long silences, and sometimes as sudden tears that came without warning. What they were going through was shaping them in ways they could not yet fully understand. The pirate ship continued its journey, stopping at hidden places and moving on again. Each stop brought uncertainty. The women were never told what would happen next. Decisions were made above them, far from their control. This lack of certainty was one of the hardest things to endure. Not knowing if tomorrow would be the same or completely different kept their minds restless. Some women began to change in quiet ways. One who used to speak often now stayed silent for long periods. Another who once seemed strong now struggled to keep her focus. The others noticed and tried to help, offering comfort through small actions, sharing food, sitting close, or simply staying nearby. They understood that strength did not always look the same. Sometimes strength meant continuing even when everything inside felt heavy. The pirates rarely spoke about the women, but when they did, it was clear that their presence was temporary in the pirates' minds. They were something to be dealt with later, not people with futures. This realization hurt deeply. To be seen as a problem instead of a person left a lasting mark on their hearts. At one point, the ship stayed longer than usual near a rough coastline. Supplies were moved back and forth. New faces appeared briefly and then disappeared. The women sensed change in the air. The crew argued more often. Voices were tense. Something was coming, though no one explained what it was. During this time, the women were kept more strictly confined. Movement was limited and watchfulness increased. This sudden shift brought fear back to the surface. Had they done something wrong? Were they being blamed for something? Their minds filled with questions that had no answers. One evening, the captain finally addressed the situation. His words were calm but firm. Plans were changing, he said. The crew needed to move quickly. Resources were tight. Nothing more was explained. The women listened carefully, trying to read between the lines. Change meant risk, but it could also mean opportunity. They held on to that thought quietly. As days passed, the tension took its toll. Sleep became harder. Dreams grew more intense. Some women woke up shaking, their minds replaying moments of fear and loss. Others struggled with guilt. Guilt for surviving when others had not, guilt for feeling weak, guilt for moments when they wished to give up. These feelings were heavy, but they shared them quietly, reminding each other that none of it was their fault. One woman spoke about the future for the first time in weeks. She wondered aloud what would happen if they ever returned home. Would anyone believe them? Would they be welcomed back or judged for things beyond their control? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The thought that survival might bring its own struggles was painful, but real. The women began to understand that even if their captivity ended, its effects would not disappear. What they were experiencing was shaping their memories, their trust, and their sense of safety. This understanding made them hold onto each other even more tightly. If the world outside failed to understand them later, at least they understood each other now. One night, a quiet argument broke out among the pirates. It grew louder than usual, voices rising sharply. The women stayed still, hearts racing. Conflict among the crew was dangerous. When power struggles happened, those without power often suffered most. They stayed alert, ready to protect one another if needed. By morning, the ship changed course. No one explained why. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with unspoken consequences. The women sensed that something had gone wrong, or would soon. This feeling of waiting for the unknown became almost unbearable. Yet, even in this uncertainty, the women did not lose their sense of self completely. They continued their small routines. They continued to share stories. They continued to remind each other of who they were beyond this ship. These acts may have seemed small, but they were powerful. They kept the women human in a place that tried to strip that away. One day, a crew member who had rarely spoken approached them quietly. He did not say much, only that they should be careful in the coming days. He offered no details and left quickly. The warning, vague as it was, confirmed their fears. Change was near. The women prepared in the only way they could, mentally. They reviewed what they knew, where they could go, who to avoid, and how to stay together. They understood that they could not control events, but they could control their responses. This mindset gave them a sense of calm amid the growing tension. As the ship moved toward another hidden shore, the women watched the land carefully. It looked harsh and unfamiliar. Nothing about it suggested safety. Still, land meant something different from open sea. It meant new possibilities for better or worse. When they were brought ashore briefly, the ground felt strange beneath their feet, solid yet uncertain. The women stayed close, watching everything. They noticed how quickly decisions were made, how little time was given for hesitation. The pirates moved with urgency, as if being chased by unseen pressure. During this time, one woman stumbled from exhaustion. Without thinking, the others supported her, lifting her gently and helping her move forward. This simple act did not go unnoticed. The pirates allowed it without comment. In that moment, the women realized something important. Their unity was visible, and it mattered. As night fell again, the women were gathered back together. The air felt different, heavier. They sensed that their situation was reaching a turning point. Whatever happened next would shape everything that followed. Fear returned, but so did determination. They had survived too much to give up now. Even if the future was unclear, they would face it together. They had learned that endurance was not just about lasting, it was about holding onto meaning. By this stage, the women were no longer just victims of events. They were witnesses to them. They remembered details. They remembered faces, places, and moments. Even if history never wrote their names, they carried the truth within them. As they lay awake that night, listening to the distant sounds of the sea and the crew, each woman held onto her own quiet promise to survive, to remember, and to one day speak the truth if given the chance. The consequences of captivity were already shaping their lives, but their story was not over yet. What came next would test everything they had learned and everything they still hoped for. The turning point came quietly, not with loud action, but with a slow change that none of the women could fully explain at first. One morning, the ship stopped near a familiar-looking coast. The air felt different, heavier but calmer. The crew moved with less urgency and more caution. Whispers replaced arguments. The women sensed that something was ending, even if they did not yet know what. Soon officials appeared on the shore. Their presence changed everything. The pirates' confidence faded. Orders became rushed. The careful balance of power the women had learned to live within suddenly broke. For the first time since their capture, the future was no longer controlled only by the ship they were on. The women were brought forward and told to wait. No explanations were given. They stood together, hearts beating fast, afraid to hope too much. Hope had been dangerous before, but now it pushed its way back into their thoughts. Something was happening, something final. After long hours, the women were told they would be leaving the ship. The words felt unreal. Some froze in disbelief. Others felt weak with relief. None of them spoke. They simply followed instructions, afraid that one wrong move might change everything. When their feet touched solid ground again, the feeling was overwhelming. The land felt steady, but their bodies still swayed as if the sea were beneath them. The women stayed close, holding onto each other as they were guided away from the ship. Behind them, the pirate world that had trapped them for so long began to fade. Freedom, they quickly learned, was not simple. The women were questioned carefully. They were asked where they came from, what they remembered, and what had happened. Speaking was harder than they expected. Words felt heavy. Some memories came out clearly. Others stayed buried, too painful to explain. They were given food, clean clothes, and a safe place to rest. These simple comforts felt strange after so long. Soft beds felt unfamiliar. Quiet rooms felt loud. Some women could not sleep at all. Others slept deeply but woke in confusion, unsure where they were. As days passed, reality slowly returned. They were no longer captives, but they were not the same people who had boarded the merchant ship months earlier. The world felt different, louder, faster, less safe than they remembered. When the time came to return home, fear returned in a new form. What waited for them there? Would their families understand? Would they be welcomed or questioned? Would their pain be seen or ignored? For some women, home was a comfort. Loved ones held them tightly, grateful simply that they were alive. For others, home was complicated. Questions were asked that felt sharp and unfair. Silence followed stories that were too hard to hear. Some women felt judged for surviving something they never chose. Society did not know how to handle their experiences. People preferred simple stories, good and bad, right and wrong. The truth was more complex. The women had lived through fear, loss, and endurance that did not fit neatly into public understanding. Many of them learned to stay quiet, not because they forgot, but because speaking brought pain. They carried their memories inside, sharing them only with those they trusted. Some wrote private letters, some kept journals, some spoke to no one at all. The effects of captivity stayed with them. Sudden sounds caused fear. The sight of the sea brought mixed emotions. Beauty and danger tangled together. Trust took time. Sleep did not always come easily. These were invisible wounds, but they were real. Yet there was also strength. The women had survived something that should have broken them. They had adapted, protected each other, and held onto their humanity in the darkest moments. That strength shaped their lives moving forward. Some women chose to help others. They supported travelers, worked with families who had lost loved ones at sea, or quietly assisted those in need. They understood suffering in a way few others did. Their compassion came from experience, not words. Others focused on rebuilding quiet lives. They found comfort in routine, in familiar places, and in small joys. Laughter returned slowly. Trust followed even slower, but it returned. Years later, fragments of their stories began to surface. Historians found records, letters, and court documents that hinted at what had been erased. Slowly, carefully, the truth emerged, not the romantic image of pirate life, but the real cost paid by those caught in it. The women were no longer nameless shadows in history. They became witnesses, survivors, proof that the sea had stories beyond adventure and treasure. Their experiences challenged long-held myths and forced people to look more closely at the past. Even those who never spoke publicly left a mark. Their endurance shaped families, communities, and generations. Their strength lived on in quiet ways, in how they raised children, in how they treated others, in how they understood pain and survival. Looking back, the women understood that their journey had not been about defeat. It had been about endurance. They had lost safety, certainty, and time, but they had not lost themselves. They remembered each other most of all, the shared looks, the silent support, the unspoken promises. In a world that tried to separate and control them, they had stayed united. Their story did not end with rescue. It continued in every choice they made afterward, in every step forward, in every moment they chose to live fully despite what they had endured. The truth about what happened to them was not meant to shock for entertainment. It was meant to be remembered with respect. These were real people, real lives, and real consequences. And though history had once tried to forget them, their survival ensured one thing: their truth would not disappear. It would remain, carried forward by memory, resilience, and the quiet power of those who refused to be erased.